Good afternoon, everyone. It is really lovely to see you for today's discussion, which is entitled A Radical Reset for Nuclear Regulation and What It Means for Us. My name is Sarah Sharples. I'm the Vice President and Dean of the Faculty of Science and Engineering. And actually, I also have I think that's lots of people joining the Teams meeting, isn't it? Yep. Great. I've also got a personal interest in this topic today. So as a professor in human factors, when I used to teach my module in what we call cognitive ergonomics, I would always start the lecture course with a description of 3 Mile Island and what happened at 3 Mile Island and all the different systemic combination of factors that contributed to, frankly, an incident that could have been an awful lot worse. I also had the privilege of going to a conference many years ago and hearing a talk from one of the 2 controllers who was on duty, I think sort of between 2 and 4 o'clock in the morning when that was happening in the 1970s. And it was a really, for me professionally, a really evocative, an important illustration of the importance of thinking about regulation, of people, of technologies, of design, of whole systems perspectives, when we are dealing with something that is going to be absolutely essential for the future of the energy system in the UK and internationally, such as nuclear. So I'm absolutely delighted that we have a number of colleagues who are joining us, first of all, to deliver a talk and then to support our question and answer session. So our talk is going to be delivered by a combination of Mark Bassett and Andrew Sherry. I think we probably need to, and Mr. is
Somebody has muted the room.
Can you hear me all right now?
Oh, yes, thank you.
Thank you. Providing providing independent advice to the Secretary of State for Defence. Mark similarly has had a number of national roles and is currently a member of the International Nuclear Safety Advisory Group. He recently retired from the International Atomic Energy Agency after 8 years where he spent time as a director and special assistant to the Director General for Nuclear Safety, Security and Safeguards. He's also spent time as Deputy Chief Nuclear Inspector at the Office for Nuclear Regulation for a number of years with over 2 decades in ONR, where he held a wide range of roles across all nuclear sectors, both civil and defence. So we're absolutely delighted to be joined by Andrew and Mark. And then for the Q&A, we're also going to be joined by Dame Professor Sue Eon. Sue is a British engineer and an expert advisor on the nuclear power industry with a career spanning 45 years. And she has chaired the UK's nuclear, I'm not very good at saying the word nuclear, this is like a nightmare for me. The UK's Nuclear Innovation and Research Advisory Board and is a member of the ONR Independent Advisory Panel and current honorary president of the National Skills Academy for Nuclear. So I'm really looking forward to the talks. Store up those questions. We're going to have about half an hour of talks, about 15 minutes first of all of questions. There's going to be refreshments outside and we've got a hard stop at, someone remind me when, at 1:30. So over to Mark and Andrew.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I always like to start with a story, I could have told the story about when I was doing my training for running a PWR at Westinghouse, and in the control room simulator, they played 3 Mile Island to us, and I can tell you, I've never felt so scared in my life. So nuclear safety is absolutely ingrained in me. But I want to tell you a different story. Picture the scene. I've just been signed into a government building, and I've been asked to give an independent perspective on a particular issue for a new reactor design. And I'm taken through the corridors and up into a conference room, and my host, the civil servant, points to piles of paper on the conference room desk, and he says to me, "Look, doesn't that give you confidence?" And I said, "No, who understands it?" And that experience of what I've learned can be called paper safety started me on a journey to really challenge and understand why we feel comfort by complexity and volume of paper, and how does that give us sometimes perhaps false comfort. I learned after then that the UK National Nuclear Laboratory, where I was working at the time, had doubled the number of their management and safety processes and procedures over a 10-year period. I started giving talks about complexity in safety and the need to drive simplification. And just last week on the BBC News website was a very sad story of this guy, Harry Oates, who died while out running in Cumbria, where he hit a live electricity pylon. And his father said, and I wrote it down because I wanted to get this right, they, Electricity Northwest, have shown no empathy towards us as a family. And this is the bit, they've just produced document after document in trying to justify their maintenance records and abiding by the procedures in place. And if there's one lesson that I've learned in my time in nuclear, and some of the things that we've tried to feed into this radical reset, this regulatory review that Mark and I are going to talk about, it's that actually we have to step back from the way we think about safety and demonstrate safety. And I hope that comes through clearly to you. Let me hand over to Mark, who's going to give a bit of an introduction and run through a couple of the sessions.
Okay, it's lovely to be here. In actual fact, the last time I was here was 1980. Quantum mechanics third year, as usual, so it's nice to be back. So thanks, Andrew. First of all, just to add on to what Andrew has said, the nuclear sector, in actual fact, in the UK, has a very good safety record and a very good environmental protection record. Indeed, so people are thinking, well, what's the problem? Well, there's a few things. Firstly, if you know, but the UK is the most expensive place in the world to build gas stations. It has got massively rising costs for decommissioning and the legacy. I used to be Deputy Chief Inspector after Sellafield for a few years. Huge work that needs to be done there, but the costs keep going up and up. The rising costs in the defence sector. One of the things I'll talk about is that this was covering defence as well. But this is not in isolation. Nuclear is not in isolation. We all know the UK's checkered history, recent history on infrastructure development. We can talk about HS2, but there's many other things as well. We know more generally defence procurement, time and cost overruns. And so there's a recognition that UK is not very good at building stuff, and also nuclear is the most expensive place in the world to build nuclear power stations. So the government wanting to, well, they've set up a number of reviews in all sorts of areas, and you know that on growth agenda. But they particularly wanted to have a look at nuclear to see, over and above the things that I've just been mentioning, was there something about the nuclear regulatory framework that needed looking at too. So this is why a group of us were asked to pull together. These are the 5 of us that were on it. Sue's on the line, Andrew, of course, is here, and it's me. The other 2 people, now it's interesting, John Ingleton is the chair. Now, John is an economist. He is steeped in regulation, he understands regulation, but he knew nothing about nuclear. And in actual fact, I believe that was a really good move, because what it does is it gets someone from the outside who's looking at this afresh. But of course, three of us here have got this a strong nuclear background. And Mustafa Latif Adamesh, he's a lawyer, very much knows about infrastructure and planning law. So it was a good balanced team. But we were given quite a task, 6 months, which was established by the Prime Minister himself, to independently review the regulation of nuclear across civil and defence, safety, environmental protection, planning, everything about nuclear regulation. So what we were meant to do was to identify, we'll have a look at it all, identify whether there's any reforms to make it be more efficient. As I've said, it doesn't sound like it's very efficient at the moment with nuclear, and proportionate, but at the same time, and this is also close to my heart as well as Andrew, as being an ex-regulator, maintaining safety standards. We did not at any stretch want to undermine the good safety performance of the nuclear sector in the UK. But we needed to have a way we can make it faster, better delivery of projects, and to have some clear recommendations to government. So, our approach, you can see from May, in actual fact, it was a bit shorter than, felt like shorter than 6 months. So we did the first call for evidence. We got over 100 consultees came in. We produced an interim report where we identified some of the issues, which we will talk about in a minute. But we wanted to test those out with people. So we then had a number of workshops, industry, regulators, civil society, academia, a whole range of them. And then the second call of evidence, we produced a final report in November. And I hope you had it's 167 pages or something like that. It's 47 recommendations. It's a big document, so you may not have read it all. But I do, if you haven't, I do commend you to have a look at least at the summary and have a look at the recommendations. As we were going through this, there were a few things that were emerging for us. First of all, and I'll talk about in a minute, about goal setting and the way we approach regulation in the UK. Great strengths to that if you do it right. Very keen, nuclear is an international business. So we were very keen to making sure that the UK kept its international commitments. But we understood there are trade-offs, and we can talk about what a lot means in a minute and things like that, particularly in the environmental sector. But the other thing that was emerging as we went through is how much process-led we are in the nuclear sector, but are we outcome-led? And also, there is safety and simplicity. I mean, I've seen throughout my career. I mean, I was writing safety cases when I was younger, and they were relatively small. And then by the time I finished, they were huge when I was doing regulation. The other thing that I want to stress before we talk in detail, let's talk about regulator and regulators. But this is not primarily a regulator issue. Partly a regulator issue, but it's a system issue. It's the whole sector. It's the industry, it's the duty holders, it's government. There was lots of blame to put about, was the way that John said it. And we have to see this as a system, and there's responsibilities everywhere, which we'll point out in a minute. We wanted to be feasible, but at the same time to be radical. But of course, maintaining safety, environmental standards. But the other thing that struck us as well was this is as much a mindset and a cultural issue as much as anything. We've been, I've been steeped in this industry, and what was really good was seeing someone like John who was able to look at it from outside and see how this was a cultural thing. Of course, Andrew will talk about that in a minute. Okay, so I'm going to cover the first two of these four, which is simplification of regulation, risk management, proportionality. And Andrew will talk about the other two. So the first thing was about simplifying regulation. If we look at the, I don't expect you to read this in detail, but this is the complexity of the regulatory framework. that there is in the UK. And this is just the civil. It's even worse in defence. And we can see that there's policy, there's legal, and then the purple ones here are all the regulators that are involved, including some of the things in Scotland and Wales as well. This is a hugely complex system for which, if someone is wanting to think about building a new facility, not just a nuclear power station, but something maybe smaller than that as well, something in the fuel cycle, this is what you're facing. Okay. And it covers, there's all the safety, security, environment, planning. So one of the things was, how can we make this better? So one of the things, there was a few recommendations that became in this area of simplifying regulation. Just on this one, this is a good example. This is what it feels like, I think, when you talk to some people who are in the industry, that you're being tugged all sorts of different ways by different organisations, different regulators, government telling you one thing as well, regulators telling you something else, and then all the planning laws and all that sort of stuff you're having to deal with. Very, very difficult. Now, there are some areas of good practice. Summerfield in particular, relatively more recently, has been able to try to join up some of this stuff, but there are only pockets of good practice, and it is very, very a complex system with duty holders being pulled this way and that. So, what did we, in this particular area, and this is why we're scampering through all of this, what we wanted, first of all, was to try to join up nuclear regulation, what we called the Nuclear Commission. Now, internationally, in the nuclear sector, commissions are very common. The United States has a nuclear commission, the Canadians, the French, the Japanese, a number of them have them. This is about collective decision making at the very top. But the other thing as well is trying to join some of this stuff up. Safety, security, environment, and what we're recommending as well is planning. That the whole lot comes under a new nuclear commission, which will be independent. It's very, very important, and one of the things that I'm close to my heart is to maintain the independence of regulation. And then the expert collective, and the other thing, being open and transparent. I mean, the nuclear sector is a lot better than it used to be on this sort of stuff, but still some of the decision makings, how open and transparent are they? And the commission would do this. The other thing, we join in defence as well. We have some interesting proposals about how we can maintain some of the things that defence needs within this system. This may take a couple of years of primary legislation to put in place, but in the meantime, there's something else that we can do. We can get the regulatory bodies working together in a way that you have a lead regulator. So what we were proposing is quite a number of the areas the Office for Nuclear Regulation will take the lead. There may be some others where the Environment Agency may very well take the lead, but it has to be such that those people who have the duties see it more of a one-stop shop. That will help things enormously. The other thing we're proposing is to move together the Defence Nuclear Safety Regulator and ONR. ONR does done some defence regulation in the licensed sites, but to join that up, now there's one of our proposals, we will see whether that happens. We're very, very keen that it does. And the other thing we're wanting to make sure in terms of safety case development, and we'll talk about this a little later, is to simplify, to really drive this in what we're also calling 3 lines of defence in safety cases, so that we can do something to address this complexity, which is not good. Haddon Cave, anyone who knows that report, that wrote it some time ago when there was the Nimrod air crash, pointed out that complexity doesn't help you. In fact, it makes things worse. And somehow, I don't think none of us thought that the nuclear sector has taken the learning of the Haddon Cave report as far as it should. Okay, risk management and proportionality. Now, again, what I was saying in the UK, really positive is the goal-setting framework that we have in the UK. There are other countries around the world that are far more prescriptive, but in actual fact, they are moving towards more goal setting, as they see, particularly in the advanced reactor world. Health and Safety at Work Act, cornerstone of that. I'm a huge fan of the Health and Safety at Work Act. I think it's a magnificent piece of legislation because one of the things that it does is it's very clear that the duty is on the duty holder. They understand their hazards and how to control them, and it is on them to be able to do that. And their duty on them is to reduce risk so far as is reasonably practicable. In those short words, which is sometimes also called a LARP, is, in my view, an excellent approach to health and safety, and it's shown that it is within the UK. The UK more generally has one of the best health and safety records in the world because of it, in my view. But they're also in the environmental sector. In some areas, it's goal setting. In others, it's not. And we'll touch on some of those shortly. But they have a LARA in radiation safety and best available techniques in the environmental sector as well. But as we say, we just got the slide back one. What's also important is this one, Nuclear Installations Act, because nuclear requires permissioning. High hazards require permissioning approaches broader than the Health and Safety at Work Act, and that's generally considered it's appropriate. There's also the international approach to licensing. So it is right that nuclear comes under more stringent regulation. And the Nuclear Installations Act and the license conditions that come to it are, again, very high level. To make and implement adequate arrangements is what most of them are. Again, putting the onus on the duty holder, but it's a more stringent form of regulation, and that's right because of the hazards and the societal concerns that nuclear poses. But what's happened, I think, over time, and we all think this, is that we have, to a certain extent, lost some of the benefits of the system, of as low as reasonably practicable, and a sense that over time we've concentrated too much on the ALA, as low as, and less on the reasonably practicable part of this. We've also become quasi-prescriptive, as has been the move. There's greater call for guidance, and then what that guidance turns into is almost a form of prescription. That the industry just says, oh, are we just meeting this? It'll do. This is for an easier life. So, and this is where it's a system issue. The industry itself, and a large part of it in the UK, is public sector funded. And do costs, where are the incentives for the industry really to control its costs? And in actual fact, it might find it for an easy life, actually, I would argue, is that it's easier for them to, crikey, we're way over, aren't we? Yeah, I'm going to have to, yeah. We're never going to get this done in time. So, but there's a whole load of things that we have come out in the recommendations. So this concept of tolerability of risk, which we have on there, is also a key part of the framework, which is also really beneficial. But we don't think that that's being used sufficiently well. So we're looking for government to provide guidance on tolerability of risk. We're wanting the regulators to review all of their guidance to make sure that it is not prescriptive, or it doesn't give the impression of being overly prescriptive. And there are some issues about proportionality as well. Right, moving on to the next bit. I'm conscious of the
Don't worry. Okay, well, I'm going to gallop through a couple of other areas. The first is not my area of expertise, so I'll probably run through this one quite quickly. This is the whole planning and environmental impact assessment for nationally significant infrastructure projects. And what I've shown here is, again, this growth of paper approaches more and more detail, more and more complexity around our environmental planning and environmental impact assessments, to the extent that High Speed 1 from London to the Channel Tunnel was 900 pages. High Speed 2, Phase 1 was 50,000 pages. Hinkley Point C, over 30,000 pages. Sizewell C, a carbon copy, 44,000 pages, slightly over. So again, there's this challenge of complexity, of multiple regulators, of different approaches, and the investment or the funding going in to protect the environment is huge. And we've got some examples in the report, some case studies, some of which have been challenged, but that's fair enough. And we can talk about the detail on some of those if we need to. But I think from our perspective as a task force, we had in mind that we need to clearly protect the environment. But let's remember why we have nuclear power. We're not making the case for it, but it is low carbon. We need energy security, but we also need to balance those societal needs with the environmental needs as well. So this was an area where we had Mustafa leading a number of recommendations. And I just wanted to touch on a couple really here. The first was recommendation 12, alternative pathway to comply with the habitats regulation. Currently, the approach that has been done, and I think the acoustic fish deterrent at Hinkley Point C is an example of this, where there is huge investment going in to protect important fish species in the Bristol Channel. An investment of £700 million for this. And when you look at the protected species, you find that actually the number of fish being saved by this is probably incredibly low. And you look at the offset between the investment and how that is protecting those critical species. And we ask the question, is there not a different way of doing this? What if, you know, nuclear licence sites are less than 1% of the land area of the UK? What if we were to say for every hectare you use, we invest X amount for the local authority to invest in environmental protection? So we take a positive, lesser protective approach. That is being discussed quite a lot because £700 million could do quite a lot for protected species. And that was a driver there. The other one I just want to highlight, encouraging fleet approaches, the one at the end. And what we had in mind here is nuclear licence sites. They're a small part of the UK land area, as I say. Therefore, for nuclear development, they're incredibly important. This is a picture of Wilver nuclear power plant now being decommissioned in North Wales in Anglesey. The plan is for Rolls-Royce to build a fleet of small modular reactors here. Why don't we think about having an environmental case for the full fleet, maximise the use of that site for small modular reactors, even though we may do that in a phased way, but let's start off by presuming we're going to take a fleet approach. So that sort of long-sighted approach was what we proposed. There are other recommendations there around judicial reviews, Finch judgment, which is all about the downstream impact of carbon emissions and so on the supply chain and the use and so on, and proportionality. So I'll just flag those. I want to get on to this one, culture and capability, because as a nuclear materials and structures person who's used to the detail of stress analysis, finite element analysis and fracture mechanics, I've learned that whilst important, people are sometimes even more important. And I'm saying this because Sarah's here as a human factors expert. Watch this video. Right. So my point of showing you that is the behaviours that we see in those around us will naturally affect how we behave. And for me, this comes back to, why do organisations exist? What do we value as organisations, and what behaviours do those values drive? And having been involved in leading nuclear organisations and in the university, I know, and I've learned the hard way, how important culture actually is. And culture comes down to values, and often the values we espouse as organisations don't always marry up to the values within the organisation. So this is just a slide from a report done by the Alliance Manchester Business School about the ONR culture. What does the organisation say about itself? The espoused values: open-minded, fair, supportive, accountable. But what does it really feel like within the organisation? I just want to point out two words. Open-minded is what ONR says about itself. Risk-averse is what it feels like in the organisation. This was done over a year's period. So culture affects behaviour. Culture affects nuclear safety and the regulation of nuclear safety. It also impacts our safety behaviours, our safety culture. And this is some work that, again, done by the Alliance Manchester Business School with Nick Shaw from ONR, who's here, around safety culture. And the timing of this couldn't be better, because in our nuclear research area, we recognised safety culture is important. So we've taken this model, which builds on leadership, it builds on the human experience, and it builds on a proactive stance. And we've got a programme, which I'll mention at the end, around driving these sorts of values and behaviours into how we do safety from a cultural perspective. So culture was one. Secondly, innovation, and innovation in digital technology, particularly machine learning, data science, artificial intelligence. It's here, it's being used now. How are we going to use this in the nuclear sector? This is some work being done by Microsoft and Idaho National Lab. Microsoft are working with Lloyd's Register around nuclear for shipping. Within the university, I put this challenge: how do we harness artificial intelligence to make our labs safer? How do we make sure AI is in the hands of experts, not driving people's behaviours? It's here, we need to do something about it. And also within the workforce, it's not just about qualifications, it's about experience. And the experience element of our expertise, our ability to exercise sound judgment around safety decisions, not simply reverting to what the procedure says. Our ability to challenge is based on experience, and we have to have a programme that drives experience into our workforce, who are getting younger because more of us are retiring. So there were three recommendations around those three things: one around culture, one around experience, and one around digital technologies. The Prime Minister, a week after our report came out, accepted the 47 recommendations, all of them, and he quoted part of the report, which I'm going to ask you a question about on the next slide. But he recognised that the lessons from this report are not just specific to nuclear, they're specific across the whole of our business area and industrial strategy. So he's asked Peter Carl, as the business secretary, to look at lessons learned and how they can be applied more broadly, and he's issued a strategic steer on the back of our report, which you can find online. So what does it mean for us? I put up these words just to highlight something that John Fingleton wrote in the preface to our report. There are three key factors that he, stepping back from the detail, flagged up as real issues: risk aversion, because the system doesn't have the right incentives; process over outcomes; and a lack of incentives. Now, I just want to have a show of hands here to see, for us as a university, which of these three themes, if you like, do you think most applies to us? And then I'll give you my take. Who thinks that we are risk averse as a university in our pioneering research and so on? Okay, a couple. Who thinks we're prioritising process and paper over outcomes. Okay, more of you. And who thinks we have a lack of incentives aligned with the public interest? Okay, one. So most people process over outcomes. So what can we do about it with our 4 themes quickly? Firstly, on simplification, clarify our 3 lines of defense within the university. 3 lines of defense: who's responsible for checking and challenging, and where's our independent line? 3 lines of defense. We have them, but I don't think we fully understand and own them yet. 3 lines of defense. Secondly, think about alarm, rebalance alarm. What is our time, cost and trouble against the risk benefit that they provide? Let's think about not just reducing risk as low as possible, but as low as practicable. Thirdly, resist paper safety, resist process over outcome. Paper safety does not keep us safe. We have to have the right balance of understanding and guidance. And lastly, enhance our safety culture. And we are already doing that through the program, the Ensure program, which we've run in nuclear, which has improved our safety culture using the NISCI metrics there. So we're looking to roll that out more widely, and we've got safety services coming on it tomorrow. Okay, Mark, just to you, and then we'll go to Q&A.
Yeah, just to finish up. So yes, the Prime Minister accepted the recommendations. There's an implementation being underway now, and we're looking forward to having an implementation plan by government, led by government, but also including the regulators and the industry by the end. Well, people say the end of this month. Let's see. Let's hope the end of this month. Andrew and I and others in the task force are available to help the implementation of this work, because we've put a lot of work into it and we really want to see it happen. And I think the response to the report has been pretty good. Of course, you're never going to please everybody in a report like this, but we had generally a very good response from government, from industry, from regulators. Have been very positive. There have been some concerns from environmental groups. We know that wildlife trusts have been saying some things quite recently. And we understand that that there may be some challenges in that area for them, but in our view, we think that there are great environmental benefits that be gained from some of our proposals. So in the big picture, what is it that we're hoping that where we will all end up with this? We'll have better, simpler safety and environment, proportionate decision making, greater proportionate decision making, less complexity. Trying to stop the over-engineering, which we've all seen happens across the industry. Faster, cost-effective delivery, better environmental outcomes, and also to strengthen the UK nuclear sector, because we think that the proposals we have in there will help the nuclear sector, both in terms of its delivery, but also its safety and environmental outcomes. And greater international engagement. I haven't touched that much on international, but international is a key thing. And greater international harmonisation within the UK. And in actual fact, UK regaining some of the things it's lost in the nuclear sector worldwide. So that's it from us. We will welcome any questions you may have.
Yes.
Thank you. And I'm very, very aware that as Dean of the Faculty, there's lots of lessons for me there as well. And I wholeheartedly agree with many of the points, particularly the sort of hiding behind process rather than thinking, what are we trying to achieve? So you do have my word, but that is something that is very much in our mindset as we're looking at some of the changes. So I think you wanted me to sit there and then hand this microphone around. It would be great to get questions from you. If we could have, we've got about 10 minutes for questions. If you could ask your questions as briefly as possible, so don't make a statement that pretends to be a question. And if you could just say briefly who you are as well, that would be really helpful. So any questions? I think we've got opportunities for questions online as well. Yeah, we've got, so sorry. Microphone to Mark, and then we've got question, how are we getting microphone to the people in the room?
Speak up, there's a microphone.
Okay, so we've got question here, and microphone to Mark.
Thank you.
Tom Bell, Strategy Manager at UK NNL. So one of your recommendations was to change the semi-urban population density criteria for siting. Government in its new national policy statement decided not to do that on the basis that there wasn't enough evidence. Do you think that's a fair assessment? Is there enough evidence to do that? Have they just not looked at it? What's the way forward? Do we need to do more R&D to get that evidence?
Yeah. No, we think that we had quite a lot of discussions with various parts of government on that particular issue. I think, to be perfectly frank, I think it was perhaps seems too hard by some people in government. We think there's some great benefits to be able to address this. It's based on old techniques and old data, and to be quite frank, there are some examples where, well, I'll give the example of Haitian. Haitian, we've got 2 power stations, Haitian 1, Haitian 2, Haitian 2 operating. On the current criteria for that, you couldn't build a 3rd one. Even if you shut down Haitian 2, what they've had encroachment of housing in such a way that building another power station you wouldn't be able to do on that site. Something's wrong with that. That's the challenge that we're giving to government.
Okay, right. We've got 3 questions online, so I'm going to ask you to be brief in your answers. Yeah. Let's go here. Then I'm going to go to the 3 raised hands in the room.
How the nuclear energy regulation is meant to work. How does it compare with how the environmental regulation is in other countries around the world, like France, South Korea, Japan? Could you give us a brief answer?
Yeah, well, it's a good question, and you need our legal expert Mustafa to really give you a clear answer. All I will say, as Mark has said, environmental planning and impact assessments are a mixture of different regulatory regimes, including local authorities, Environment Agency, Natural England, and Wales and Scotland separately, and so on. One of the things in terms of the implementation on our environmental recommendations is how do we align with European law? And that is one of the challenges that we're finding. We've made radical, but we believe good for the environment recommendations. The question is whether they will align and whether they will require primary or secondary legislation.
Great, thank you. No,
yeah,
sorry,
Andrew. Sorry, Sarah. It's me, Sue Ian. If I can just add to Andrew's answer there. We did look. Mustafa looked very carefully at things in particularly France and Spain, and they have a much simpler approach to how they address the environmental challenges. And so, looking to align with what they can do under European law would be extremely helpful to us to do things in the same way.
Brilliant, and thank you, Sue, for jumping in there. So please do stay on screen. Right, we've got a question from Paul Coffey online. Paul, I don't know if you can unmute and put your camera on and ask your question. If not, in that case, let's go to Nick Bennett, who I can see on the screen. Thanks, Nick.
Good afternoon, everyone. So yeah, Nick Bennett, I head up our independent advice and assurance directorate here in Amentum. Thanks for this, the speech so far. It's been really useful and interesting. From my perspective, the question I've got is how do we enable assurance functions to actively challenge unnecessary conservatism rather than kind of only pushing risk in one direction?
Yeah, really great question.
Thank you for asking that question. I'll just give one answer because I know this is the sort of thing we do talk about, because we talk about a lot, but always the challenge comes back around as low as and much less around the reasonably practicable. And so one of the things we've suggested is that within the 3 lines of defence, the independent assurance, if you like, and also within the regulator, one idea is to have a developer or a duty holder advocate making the case internally, and so that there is this balanced tension within the 3 lines of defence to do that. The second thing is that currently we feel often that we need to assess everything that's presented to us internally with the second and third line. Of course, 100% should be checked by the first line, a smaller proportion by the second line, and an even smaller proportion by the independent third line. I'm not sure we've quite got that balance correct. We should focus on the really important things from both sides of the equation.
I'll just add one very quick thing. As an ex-regulator, a number of times I heard within industry, people say the regulators won't allow that. And I'd say, did you ask us?
It's there's an analogy there with making changes to engineering courses and being told the professional institutions won't allow that either. So I think that often we hide behind process, don't we? So right, we've got Matt England online. Matt.
Hi, Matt England, Independent Assurance, coincidentally, at Sizewell C. My question's around kind of some of the whys. I think I've been in the industry nearly 30 years and actually can see some of the things that you described, so really welcome some of the recommendations. But I just wondered if we understand why we've kind of, for example, become more risk averse in the last 2-3 decades.
Well, I'll give you my take and then maybe what. My experience has been that we introduced processes and procedures in the late 80s, early 90s in a desire, certainly in the UKAA where I worked, to improve the quality and the reliability of what we do. Every time something went a little bit wrong, we added in another check or another procedure or another paragraph or something. And so what was at the time reasonable changes to improve quality, safety and so on has accumulated to the extent over decades that some of our processes and procedures are pretty much unworkable. And we lead to, I'll quote unquote from a safety report, stultifying bureaucracy to the extent that it paralyzes us.
Yeah, I'll add one thing that's related to what I said before. I think we've lost sight of the as low as reasonably practicable, and what we've actually become is slowly over time quasi-prescriptive for very good reasons. But to a certain extent, and this is one of the things I would say with industry has just become too reliant on things like relevant good practice, where it just says, oh, that's how you do it, and then it ratchets and becomes more and more onerous over time. You're always building on things and not removing things.
Right. Okay. We've got 1 minute left. There's a question there from Dave in the room. We've got Mark and Joel online, and I'd like Sue and our colleagues here to have final words. So I'm going to take David, then Mark, then Joel. Then I'm going to invite all our panelists to just say one final word. Dave. Brilliant. Oh, it's all right. No, that's great. Promise from digital. Then we've got Mark and Joel, and I'm going to ask you to do all three at once. Mark. Oh, you're on mute, Mark.
Apologies. Yeah, my question's up on the screen. Fleet approach. Done various projects over the years, particularly looking at Sizewell C at the moment, who are struggling to justify the largely a replication of the Hinkley Point C design, and that's been a hugely contentious thing. Looking ahead to fleets of SMRs, are they going to have a fleet type acceptance, a type authorization more than current reactors do? Is the regulatory system going to be able to support that and streamline the licensing of fleets of SMRs?
Yeah, okay, so digital, fleet approach, and then Joel, final question, and then I'll go to each panelist.
Okay, so really just a question about implementation. How do we make people who are less senior in these organisations feel comfortable with perhaps not adding paperwork when that paperwork has provided them with that safety in the past? You know, how do you not add things to risk assessments and you accept that people know what they're doing without them feeling uncomfortable with it?
Brilliant. So Sue, I'll allow you first pick of those questions and just a final comment.
Yeah, I'll do the fleet one. Thanks, Sarah. certainly the easiest way to start, Mark, is the NSSS, the reactor itself, and the nuclear island, which it is certainly possible to run on a fleet basis. There are always some site-specific things that you have to take into account, and that's inevitable. But simplifying the site-specific ones so that you don't end up with 40,000 pages of environmental impact assessment rather than a lot less would be appropriate. So it's beholden upon everybody to really look at, is what I'm raising and what I'm describing here really important enough to include in the assessment? And in 90% of the cases it probably isn't, because if you write a £40,000 impact assessment, then somebody's got to assess it and respond to it, which just gives you a do loop. So fleet approach, certainly if you've got more than one on the same site, such as Wilfer with the 3 Rolls Royces, it should be absolutely perfect to run fleet approach on that site and on other sites.
Brilliant. Thank you.
And sorry, last one, Sarah. Finally, this is a once in a generation chance. It's the first time in a generation we've had the chance to shift the dial. It's up to all of us to actually make sure we don't lose that opportunity.
I think that's really, really important. Over to you for some final words.
Okay, yeah, just on digital. Digital is here, and I think it could positively impact all areas. Design, it could impact decommissioning, understanding what the records tell us about it. And I know NDA have got a large program that they're looking to develop. It could impact on regulation. It could impact here around risk assessment and so on. But the key for me in the application of digital and AI and so on, it has to be led by experts with experience. Okay, it's not artificial intelligence guiding the blind. It has to have that expert leadership.
And the question about more junior staff, what I used to say to people when I was a regulator to new staff was, being a regulator is not just another independent nuclear safety assessment. It's about regulatory judgment, and this requires appropriate expertise and training. But the other thing is leadership. The leadership of an organisation has to enable those people further down to have the right training and things like that, and the ability to make judgments and not just, to be perfectly honest, cover their asses. It shouldn't be like that, and that's a leadership issue.
Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking our panellists for a fantastic. All agree we could have actually probably carried on for another hour there, so I believe there are refreshments outside. Thank you to all of those who have participated online, really appreciate it. We have captured your questions, and if there are any questions you haven't had a chance to write, then please do add them to the chat. And I believe there's a QR code that if you could possibly give feedback on this event, that would be really, really helpful as well. So thank you to those organisers, thank you to our panellists, and please enjoy the refreshments outside. Thank you.